On my birthday, I got a text from my dad. "We sold your car. Family comes first." That single message sparked a chain of events that would uncover years of buried betrayals. From a stolen car and demands to pay my brother's tuition, to the night I walked out with every piece of evidence, I was about to take my life back for good. The pediatric floor has its own soundtrack if you stay long enough to learn it. It's the squeak of rubber soles, the slow beep-beep of a pulse ox, a parent's whisper that tries and fails to hide fear. By noon, I'd been at it for 6 hours, tracing the same loop from room to room, smile to smile, chart to chart, telling myself that the universe would at least return the favor and leave my birthday alone. I didn't expect a cake or balloons. I just wanted a quiet shift, a clean set of labs, no codes, no drama. It was a small wish, smaller than the paper bracelet circling my wrist. I had my head down at the nurse's station, double-checking a med dose for a kid with stubborn asthma, when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my scrubs. A second buzz followed fast, the way a bee loops back to sting a second time. I didn't check it right away. Habit, patience first. I signed off the dose, tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and only then slid the phone out. The message glared white in the blue hospital light. "Dad, we sold your car. Family comes first. Be grateful we let you live here rent-free." There was no emoji. No "love you" or "happy birthday," or even a period to soften the blunt edge of it. For a breath and a half, I forgot how to stand. The floor wavered, and the voices around me grew distant, stretched thin like taffy. I set the phone on the counter because my fingers were shaking hard enough to betray me. You know those movie moments where the main character zooms out of their own body and watches from above? It wasn't like that. It was worse. I was still here, stuck inside skin that suddenly felt too tight, trying to hear past the roaring in my ears. "Hey, birthday girl," Dr. Reynolds said in passing, the kind of breezy hallway compliment surgeons keep in their back pocket. "You're a trooper for working today." I nodded, hoping my face remembered how to be a face. The edges of the room sharpened by degrees, monitors, chart racks, scuffed paint on the corner wall, and the phone waited where I'd abandoned it, a small square of ruin. My car. My car. The words thudded in my chest like footsteps on stairs. That old Corolla wasn't fancy. It rattled on cold mornings. The AC wheezed when summer came early, and the radio only found 3 stations, 2 of them country, whether I liked it or not, but it was mine. No cosigner, no "we'll help you this once," no debt that turned into a leash. I worked double weekends, skipped coffees, learned the sick geometry of paying extra on the principal so the math couldn't hold me hostage. 2 years of that, and one afternoon at a lot that smelled like hot rubber and old sales pitches, I'd signed my name, slid into a seat worn smooth by other people's lives, and claimed something no one could take away. Until now. The next breath I took felt like swallowing glass. I picked up the phone again, not because I wanted to read the message again, I didn't, but because I needed proof I hadn't hallucinated it into being. The words stayed put. "We sold your car." We, as if community property could be willed into existence by a plural pronoun. Family comes first. Family always comes first in our house when what they really mean is you don't. Be grateful. That one got me. Be grateful, like I should send a thank you note for the privilege of having bought my own freedom. "Madison?" Amelia's voice came from my periphery. She was carrying a cupcake no bigger than a pitesse, one candle stuck at a brave tilt. "You got a second?" Her smile dimmed when she saw my face. She set the cupcake down, hand hovering, cautious as if approaching a skittish horse. What happened? I should have said it right then. I should have let the words fall between us and trusted someone else to help hold them up. But I could see room 12 over her shoulder, a little boy with dinosaur stickers climbing the IV pole, and a mom with the hollow eyes of no sleep. I straightened, found my smile in the drawer where I keep my professional voice. "In a minute," I said, softer than I meant to. "Give me just a minute." She didn't push. That's one of the reasons I love her. She slid the cupcake closer and dropped her voice. "Make a wish when you're ready. No pressure." When she walked away, I watched the single candle flicker, like it wasn't sure which direction the air was coming from. I stepped into the med supply closet because it was the only door nearby that promised a sliver of privacy. The light in there is too bright and too white, and everything smells like antiseptic and plastic. I braced my shoulder against the shelving and called my father. Voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I thumbed to my mother's name, waited through 3 rings, and almost hung up before she answered with a brittle cheerfulness I knew too well. "Madison, honey, I'm in the middle of—" "What did you do?" My voice sounded calm and far away. "The car is in my name. Where is my car?" A small pause, the shift of a phone against a cheek. "Your father handled it. We needed the money for family expenses. You live at home for practically nothing." "This is fair." I closed my eyes and could see, with alarming clarity, the paper I'd signed in April, when Dad dropped the keys on the kitchen counter and said, "Just registration renewal, kiddo." I had one foot in the door and a granola bar in my mouth, and I signed where he tapped his finger. "Right there, we're late. Hurry up." I signed because I wanted to be a good daughter on my way to being a good nurse, and now my own signature rose up to mock me. "That's theft," I said, and the word echoed too loud in the tiny room. "You can't sell something you don't own." "The title. Your father added his name," she said, as if we were discussing switching the laundry before it mildewed. "He took it in for inspection. You signed the form. You know how these things go." I leaned my head against cool metal shelving and stared at the floor where a stray IV cap had lodged under the baseboard. "And the part where you told me you were selling it?" "Don't be dramatic, Madison." She huffed a little laugh. "It's a car. You can take the bus. Lots of people do. Honestly, the attitude, on your birthday of all days." There it was, a neat table setting of our family's whole philosophy. Take, reframe, scold, call it love. I didn't trust my voice to hold steady, so I ended the call before it could shatter. In the thin silence that followed, I could hear my own heartbeat, like I'd run stairs without moving. I thought about the first time the taking started. It wasn't money. It was a necklace. My grandmother's pearls, the ones that felt cool against my throat the day she clasped them for me and said, "Always know your worth, kiddo." They looked different on my mother's skin at Thanksgiving, and when I asked, gentle, hopeful, she smiled that wafer-thin smile and said, "Family shares." Later, it was a scholarship check that never made it to my account, a Christmas envelope, kept safe in a drawer I never saw again, a constant parade of tiny debts assigned to me in the name of we. By the time I bought my car, I had learned a new arithmetic. You can't out-earn a hole you didn't dig. A knock sounded on the closet door, soft. "You good?" Amelia asked. I cleared my throat and lied automatically. "Yeah, be right out." I glanced down at the phone again, and this time my thumb hovered over the thread so long the screen dimmed, and I had to wake it back up. The message still sat there, spare and mean. Somewhere beyond this door, a call light chimed, and someone coughed and a small voice asked for apple juice. The world didn't care that my life had just been split cleanly in two. I slid the phone back into my pocket and walked out. Smile, tasks, vitals. I forced my mind onto rails and let it carry me. In room 7, the little boy with the dinosaurs wanted to see my stethoscope, so I draped it around his neck and told him he looked like the boss. He grinned a gap-toothed grin that made his mom's eyes go glassy in that grateful way that always breaks me a little. In room 4, I bit back a joke, because the kid there had the kind of pain you don't drag humor across. I charted with my left hand while I refilled a humidifier with my right. My body remembered what to do. My brain was somewhere else, jogging a loop it couldn't finish. How did he add his name? What did I sign? Where is the car right now? Parked behind a gas station, changing hands under a faded awning. The images came unbidden, blurry and cruel. By the time the clock scraped past 2, I had almost convinced myself I could make it to the end of the shift without falling apart. I could go home, ask questions, keep my voice measured, line up words like chess pieces, and move them deliberately across the board. That was the lie I was busy telling myself when the phone buzzed again. A preview banner slid across the top of the screen before I could stop it. Dad. Oh, and Derek starts next month. You'll cover first semester, $1,800 due this week. My mouth went dry. Somewhere down the hall, Amelia laughed at something, bright as coins on ceramic tile. The candle on the cupcake had given up and leaned sideways into the frosting. A tiny white flag. I stared at the new message until the letters blurred and bled into one another, until the numbers might as well have been teeth. A nurse from night shift brushed past and apologized, and I realized I hadn't moved in a full minute. When I finally looked up, the hallway tilted again, but this time it didn't wobble back into place. It stayed off-kilter just long enough for a thought to land with startling clarity, like a coin dropped into a jar no one could pretend not to hear. They don't plan to stop unless I make them. The phone buzzed a third time, the vibration running along the counter and into my bones, and for a beat, I couldn't bring myself to look. Then I did, because if there's one thing I know after years of taking vitals in rooms where fear lives, it's that you check the numbers even when you don't like what they say. The name on the screen wasn't my father's this time. It was my mother's. His plate always filled first, his stories told without interruption, his opinions presented as if they'd already been voted law. My mother would smile and nod at the right beats, spooning food onto his plate, even when he could have done it himself. Derek, younger by 5 years, sat across from me, swinging his legs under the table, oblivious to the weight pressing down from both ends. Back then, I thought that was normal. Families had hierarchies, sure, but ours felt like a pyramid that always kept me straining upward. It didn't start with money. It started with small things, like the pearl necklace my grandmother gave me when I was 15. I remember her warm hands fastening it around my neck, and the way she said, "Always know your worth, Maddie." It was one of the few times someone in the family looked at me without expectation attached. A few months later, the pearls were gone. I spotted them around my mother's throat at Thanksgiving, her fingers brushing the clasp as she told Aunt Carol, "Family shares." I'd asked where they were when I first noticed they were missing, but my mother had just laughed softly, almost pitying, and told me I'd see them again when it was right. I never did. There were other moments, tiny enough on their own to ignore, if you wanted to keep the peace. My father borrowing the birthday money from Aunt Susan to fix a lawnmower that mysteriously still didn't work. My mother keeping safe the $300 my summer babysitting job had earned me. Then acting confused months later when I asked for it back. Each incident came wrapped in the language of family duty. The kind of phrasing that sounds noble until you realize it's just camouflage. Over the years, those moments piled up like stones in my pockets, each one weighing me down in a way I didn't notice until I was already drowning. Derek never carried that weight. He was the golden boy from the start, the one my parents told neighbors was destined for big things. He got his first bike without chores to earn it. A gaming console, the year I got nothing but a sweater from the discount store. When he turned 16, they handed him the keys to a shiny used Jeep with a bow on top, a gesture that earned my mother gushing comments on Facebook about what wonderful parents they were. I remember watching him in the driveway that day, his friends piling in for a joyride, while my own ride to school was the public bus with a transfer in the middle. The unfairness burned, but in our house, pointing it out was worse than staying quiet. So I stayed quiet. I learned young that my father's approval came in rare, brittle doses, and only when I bent myself into the shape he wanted. I got my first job at 16, babysitting at first, then shifts at the grocery store. My paychecks were modest, but they were mine, or so I thought. Within a month, my father started collecting rent, $400 a month, even though I was still in high school and ate most of my meals standing at the counter after work. "It's time you learned responsibility," he'd said, as if responsibility didn't already keep me up at night while my friends were worrying about prom dresses and field trips. That money didn't go to utilities or groceries. I know because nothing about our house changed. The same leaky faucet in the kitchen, the same threadbare couch. My mother still clipped coupons and sighed over the price of milk. But Derek's shelves kept filling with sneakers and sports gear, and every few months there was a new gadget he'd just happened to get on sale. It's strange how the mind stores these details, not in chronological order, but in emotional layers. As I left the hospital that evening, the cool air hit my face and brought with it the smell of wet leaves from the strip of grass between the bus stop and the road. That smell sent me back to an October afternoon when I was 19, juggling a bag of groceries and my school books. Derek was in the driveway with a brand new laptop, bragging about how Mom and Dad wanted him to be prepared for college. I remember feeling the muscles in my back tighten as I carried in the groceries I'd paid for, listening to my parents gush over his bright future. No one asked about the midterm exam I'd just taken or the double shift I'd pulled to pay for my own textbooks. By the time I climbed the bus steps, gripping the cold metal pole for balance, I realized the memories weren't coming at random. They were organizing themselves, lining up like evidence on a corkboard, each string connecting to the next. The necklace, the birthday money, the rent, the unreturned loans. The way my father's voice turned from warm to sharp whenever I questioned the fairness of any of it. Every piece was part of a larger picture I'd trained myself not to see, because seeing it would mean admitting the truth. My family had been taking from me for years, and the only reason they stopped for breath was to plan the next take. I stared out the smudged bus window as we pulled away from the hospital, the city blurring into streaks of light and shadow. The text about the car was just the latest and most blatant in a long line of betrayals, but somehow it hurt more than the rest. Maybe because the car had been my one act of rebellion, something I'd saved for and chosen without their input, proof that I could create a life outside their control, and now it was gone, sold off in some casual transaction, probably sealed with a handshake in a driveway, my father's name forged neatly next to mine. The bus jolted to a stop, and I caught sight of my reflection in the window. A face older than 24 should look, eyes holding more questions than answers. How much more had I signed away without realizing? How many other lines in my life had they already crossed while I was too busy surviving to notice? The driver called out my stop, snapping me back into the moment. I stepped down onto the pavement, the familiar street stretching toward the house I no longer felt was home. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, and for a heartbeat I considered ignoring it. But habit won. I pulled it out, and the preview of the message froze me mid-step. It wasn't from my parents this time. It was from Derek. "Thanks for covering my tuition, sis. You're the best." By the time noon rolled around, the pediatric floor was buzzing in that strange rhythm it gets when everything is just busy enough to keep you from catching your breath, but not so hectic that you're drowning. I'd spent the morning moving from room to room, adjusting IV drips, calming nervous parents, and coaxing a stubborn toddler into taking her antibiotics. The smell of disinfectant, mixed with faint traces of apple juice and crayons, clung to the air, and somewhere down the hall, the muffled sound of a cartoon theme song played from a patient's TV. I was bent over the nurse's station, scribbling a note into a chart, when I caught a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. "Hey, birthday girl." Amelia's voice was warm and unguarded, carrying that kind of affection you don't realize you've been starving for until it shows up in front of you. She was balancing a tiny cupcake in her hand, the frosting pale pink with a single candle sticking up like it was holding its breath. Behind her, Tina peeked around the corner, smiling like she'd been waiting for this moment all morning. "We didn't want to make a big scene," Amelia went on, setting the cupcake gently on the counter beside my paperwork, "but you deserve at least this much." I stared at it for a second longer than I should have, my throat tightening around the words I didn't want to say. Part of me wanted to lean into their kindness, to let the warmth of it push away the cold weight that had been pressing against my ribs since that text. But another part of me, the part that had been trained over years to keep my feelings locked down in public, kept my voice light. "You guys didn't have to do this," I said, but my smile was real enough for them to believe it. "Make a wish," Tina said softly, almost like she knew not to push too hard. I glanced at the candle, and for a moment, I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was in my car, pulling into the driveway on the day I brought it home, the sun bouncing off the windshield, the keys warm in my palm. I could still feel the pride in my chest, that electric rush of knowing I'd bought something with my own money, no strings attached. The image twisted suddenly, morphing into the empty spot in the driveway I would see tonight, and the wish that bubbled up wasn't one you can blow onto a candle without breaking the air in the room. I bent down and blew the candle out quickly, before the heat in my eyes could spill over. Amelia and Tina clapped quietly, the sound small but genuine. "We're grabbing lunch together," Amelia said. "You should come with us. It's your birthday, for God's sake. Let us spoil you a little." I opened my mouth to answer, but the vibration in my pocket stopped me. I knew before I looked that it wasn't going to be good news. I didn't even want to check, but my thumb had a mind of its own. The preview bar lit up. "Dad, oh, and Derek starts next month. You'll cover first semester. $5,800 due this week." Something in my stomach dropped hard, like an elevator skipping floors. The cupcake blurred in my vision, and I heard Amelia's voice from far away. "Mads, you okay?" I locked the phone without answering, forcing my hands to stay still on the countertop. "Yeah," I lied. "Just work stuff." The kind of lie you hope people accept without peeling back the paper. Amelia tilted her head, studying me like she wanted to press further, but the ringing of a call light down the hall pulled her away. "We'll save you a seat," she said, and she and Tina disappeared around the corner. I stayed there a moment longer, staring at the cupcake, the candle now leaning into the frosting like it had given up. The $5,800 wasn't just a number. It was my security deposit for the apartment I'd been quietly saving for, the ticket out of the house that had become less of a home and more of a cage. I thought about how many doubles I'd worked, how many nights I'd traded sleep for an extra shift, how many small luxuries I'd denied myself just to see that number climb in my savings account. And now, in the span of 2 short texts, they'd taken my car and decided they were entitled to my future too. I picked up the cupcake, peeled the wrapper halfway down, and took a bite just so I'd have something to do with my hands. The sugar hit my tongue, but it didn't taste like much of anything. The chatter of the nurse's station flowed around me, someone joking about a patient's toddler escaping down the hall, someone else complaining about the coffee being too weak, but it all felt like it was happening under glass. When my phone buzzed again, I knew it wasn't going to be Amelia reminding me about lunch. I pulled it out anyway, almost daring it to confirm what I already felt building. The name on the screen was Derek, and the message was as casual as if he were thanking me for a ride to the mall. "Thanks for covering my tuition, sis. You're the best." I set the cupcake down so fast it tipped onto its side, frosting smearing the counter. I read the text again, slower this time, letting each word settle where it wanted, letting the entitlement hang in the air between us even though he wasn't there. Somewhere deep inside, a line I hadn't known was there began to pull taut. The rest of the shift was a blur. I checked charts, answered call lights, smiled where I was supposed to smile. My body moved on autopilot, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, circling the same truth over and over. They weren't going to stop unless I made them. When the afternoon lull hit and the ward fell quieter, I slipped into the supply closet and leaned back against the shelves. I pulled out my phone one more time, scrolling through the 3 messages: the car, the tuition, the thanks that didn't feel like thanks, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty for the anger threading through me. It felt necessary. And as I stood there in that too-bright closet, the hum of the fluorescent light above me, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to do something they'd never seen coming. The shift finally ended, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. If anything, it settled in deeper, like it had found the place it wanted to live. I changed out of my scrubs in the cramped locker room, stuffed them into my bag, and pulled on my jacket. The hospital hallways were quieter now, the day shift noise giving way to the low murmur of night staff, but my head was still loud with the same words looping over and over. "We sold your car. You'll cover his tuition. Thanks, sis." Outside, the air was sharp and cool, the late afternoon light slanting across the parking lot. I walked past rows of cars, some shiny and new, some dented and faded, and for a second, I imagined my Corolla there, waiting for me like always. The thought was so automatic that I almost reached for the keys in my pocket before remembering there was nothing to unlock anymore. The spot where I'd parked this morning was already filled by a black SUV that wasn't mine, the reflection in its windows blank and foreign. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and I made the walk with my shoulders hunched against a wind that smelled faintly of rain. My bag felt heavier than usual, pulling against my shoulder with each step. Or maybe that was just the way the day had been dragging me down from the moment I read that first text. I passed a cafe where people were laughing over coffee, their coats draped over chairs, their faces relaxed. I wondered if any of them had ever had their life yanked out from under them in the middle of a workday. At the bus shelter, I checked the schedule on the faded sign out of habit, even though I already knew I'd be waiting 15 minutes. I sat on the cold metal bench and tried not to think about the fact that this route would take 3 times as long as the drive I used to make. The bus ride was more than just an inconvenience. It was a reminder that something I'd built for myself, through sacrifice and stubbornness, was gone because someone else decided they were entitled to it. When the bus finally pulled up, brakes hissing, I climbed aboard and fed the fare into the machine. The driver, a middle-aged man with a tired smile, nodded at me as I moved down the aisle. I found a seat by the window, dropped my bag beside me, and leaned my forehead against the glass. The city rolled past in fragments: storefronts, traffic lights, kids on bikes cutting between cars. Somewhere between stops, my mind drifted back to the day I bought the Corolla. It had been late spring, the kind of day where the sun was warm, but the breeze still carried a hint of cool. I'd walked onto that used car lot with a folder in my hand, printouts of models I'd researched for weeks, notes about mileage and reliability, my budget written in bold at the top of the page. The salesman had tried to upsell me on something flashier, but I'd stuck to my plan. When I slid behind the wheel for the test drive, I knew. The way the engine hummed, the steady feel of the steering. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd signed the paperwork, written the check, and driven home with the windows down, the air rushing in like freedom itself. My father had been in the driveway when I pulled up. He'd looked the car over once, then said, "Could have gotten you a better deal if you'd asked," before walking back inside. I remember gripping the keys tighter, the satisfaction still burning warm despite his dismissal. That car was more than transportation. It was a line I'd drawn between me and the life they wanted to keep me trapped in. Now, watching the rain start to speckle the bus window, I thought about how easily they'd crossed that line. Not just crossed it, erased it completely, like it had never been there. A woman got on at the next stop, juggling grocery bags, and sat across from me. One of the bags split slightly at the seam, revealing a loaf of bread and a bunch of bananas. I caught her eye and offered a small smile. She smiled back, the kind you give a stranger when you're both just trying to get home. It struck me then how different my life could be if I didn't have to walk into that house tonight, if I didn't have to pretend for the sake of keeping the peace. The bus slowed for another stop, and I saw the gas station on the corner, its awning a little crooked, the lot half empty. For some reason, I pictured my father there earlier today, shaking hands with some stranger, while my car idled between them, keys changing hands like cash. The thought made my jaw clench. I wondered if he'd even looked back at it as it drove away, or if he'd just pocketed the money and moved on. The ride stretched on, every red light and stop making me more certain that this wasn't just about the car. It was about every time they'd taken something from me and dressed it up as a favor or a lesson. It was about every moment I'd stayed quiet because it was easier than starting a fight. I knew I couldn't win. The $5,800 was just the next item on their list, and they didn't care that it was my ticket out. I tightened my grip on the strap of my bag, feeling the shape of my phone through the fabric. I could call them right now, demand answers, tell them exactly what they'd done to me. But the bus jolted over a pothole, and I realized I didn't want to do this halfway, between stops, with strangers overhearing. If I was going to confront them, it would be face to face, where they couldn't hang up or hide behind text messages. The bus finally turned onto my street, the rows of houses coming into view. Each one looked the same as it always had, but mine felt different now, like a stage I was about to step onto, knowing the script had changed. My stomach tightened as we pulled up to my stop. I stood, slung my bag over my shoulder, and stepped down into the damp air. The walk to the house was short, but each step felt heavier. I could see the glow of the kitchen light through the window, the shadows of people moving inside. My phone buzzed again in my pocket, and without thinking, I pulled it out. It wasn't my father this time. It wasn't Derek. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a message that made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk. "I think you should know what your parents are saying about you right now." I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring at the message from the unknown number. The streetlight above buzzed faintly, casting an orange halo over my shoes. I didn't reply. Whoever it was could wait. My pulse was already too high, and I could feel the familiar burn of adrenaline threading through my arms. All that mattered now was walking into that house and hearing it from them directly. The kitchen smelled like roasted meat and onions when I opened the door. My mother was at the stove, her back to me, stirring something in a heavy pot. My father's voice floated in from the living room, low and relaxed, the television punctuating his sentences with bursts of canned laughter. For a second, it almost looked like any other evening, until I stepped inside far enough for my mother to turn around. "There you are," she said, like I'd been gone for weeks instead of hours. She wiped her hands on a towel and glanced at the clock. "We're eating soon. Go wash up." "Where's my car?" The question came out sharper than I'd planned. I was still standing by the door, bag strap cutting into my shoulder, and I could feel my fingers curling into a fist. My father appeared in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, remote still in one hand. "Sold it this morning. Guy gave us cash. He said it the way someone might tell you they'd taken out the trash, as if it was a chore checked off the list. You had no right, I said. The words were steady, but my heart was pounding so hard it made my voice feel like it was coming from somewhere else. We needed the money, he replied, walking past me to the fridge, like this conversation didn't deserve his full attention. Family expenses. That was my property, I said, louder this time. My name is on the title. Not anymore, my mother cut in, still stirring. She didn't look at me when she spoke. Your father handled all that. You signed the paperwork months ago when he took it for inspection, remember? The memory hit me in pieces. A rushed morning, him shoving a form toward me at the kitchen counter saying, "Just registration renewal. We're late. Sign it." I'd scrawled my name without reading because I had to be at work in 10 minutes. You forged my signature, I said, my voice tightening. You added your name without telling me. That's fraud. My father finally turned to face me, holding a beer he'd just cracked open. You think you know what fraud is? We've supported you for years. You live here for practically nothing. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. $400 a month in rent isn't nothing, plus groceries, plus bills. You're not supporting me, you're bleeding me dry. His jaw flexed. Watch your tone. I dropped my bag on the floor and stepped forward. No, you watch yours. You sold something I worked for years to afford. You didn't ask, you didn't warn me. You just took it. And now you expect me to empty my savings for Derek. Your brother is starting college, my mother said, her voice tightening the way it always did when she was preparing to guilt me into submission. We want him to have a good start. And you didn't want me to have one? I asked. When I started nursing school, I worked double shifts and slept 4 hours a night just to keep up. Where was the good start then? My father's face hardened. This isn't about the past. It's about what's needed now. And right now, we need that tuition money. I stared at him for a long second, and that was when I knew he wasn't going to admit any of it was wrong. He didn't even see it that way. In his mind, my labor, my money, my things, none of it was really mine. They were just resources for the family to use as they saw fit. So who bought it? I asked finally. He took a sip of his beer. Friend of a guy I know from work, paid in cash. A good deal considering the mileage. Do they know it wasn't yours to sell? He smirked faintly, like I was being ridiculous. Doesn't matter now. The realization settled in cold. The car was gone, and he thought that was the end of the story. But I could feel something shifting inside me, something that wasn't going to let it end here. My mother moved to the counter and began ladling food into serving dishes. Let's not start an argument before dinner. Sit down, Madison. We'll talk later. I didn't move. We're talking now. My father set his beer on the counter, the sound sharp against the wood. You're under this roof. You follow our rules. And our rules say family comes first. I met his stare without blinking. Then maybe I need a different roof. His expression didn't change, but the air between us shifted, heavier, more dangerous. The television in the living room laughed again, oblivious. My mother's hand stilled over the serving spoon. For the first time in a long time, no one seemed to know what to say next. And that was when Derek's footsteps started down the stairs. Derek took the last 2 steps in a single hop, like he'd been eavesdropping and couldn't wait to jump into the middle of whatever was happening. He landed beside me, grinning, and gave my arm a light punch, the way he did when we were kids. Hey, tuition fairy, he said, his voice carrying that easy confidence of someone who's never had to wonder where the money's coming from. Dad says you're covering my first semester. Perfect timing too, I just ordered my new laptop. I stared at him, taking in the way he shifted his weight, completely unaware, or maybe unconcerned, about the tension in the air. Perfect timing, I repeated, my voice flat. My mother stepped in quickly, as if she could redirect the conversation by sheer will. Dinner's ready, she said, gesturing toward the dining room. Let's all sit down like a proper family. We moved toward the table, though I felt more like I was being herded. My father took his usual place at the head, my mother to his right, Derek across from me. The good dishes were out, the ones reserved for holidays and important guests, though the only guest tonight was the expectation that I'd sit quietly and take whatever was served, both on the plate and off. The small talk started in the same careful way it always did. My mother commented on the weather. My father recounted a story from work that no one was really listening to. Derek talked about his dorm assignment, like it was the only thing worth discussing. I pushed food around my plate, feeling the tension coil tighter with each bite I didn't take. Finally, as my mother set down a slice of chocolate cake in front of me, my supposed favorite, my father cleared his throat. "So, about Derek's tuition," he said, like we were discussing who would take out the trash. "We'll need the check by Friday. University wants the first payment before orientation." I set down my fork carefully. "I'm not paying Derek's tuition." The words dropped into the space between us like a stone in water, the ripples immediate and visible. My father's face didn't change right away, but his knuckles whitened around his water glass. "What do you mean you're not paying?" "It means no," I said. "I'm not giving you $5,800. I'm not covering Derek's education. And you had no legal right to sell my car." "Madison, be reasonable," my mother cut in, her voice carrying that rehearsed edge of wounded patience. "We've given you everything, a home, support through nursing school, family meals every night." "I paid for nursing school myself," I interrupted. "I pay rent. I buy groceries, and that car was mine, bought with my money, in my name, until Dad committed fraud by adding his name without my knowledge." The color rose in my father's cheeks. "You ungrateful little. After everything we've done, you live in our house practically free. $400 a month plus utilities plus groceries," I shot back. "That's not free. That's me paying for the privilege of being treated like an item." His voice sharpened, the mask slipping. "That's nothing compared to what apartments cost." "Then maybe it's time I got my own apartment," I said. Derek blinked, the first sign that maybe he was realizing this wasn't just sibling banter. "Wait, so you're not paying my tuition?" "Dad said it was all arranged." "No, Derek," I said, turning to him. "I'm not paying your tuition. Dad sold my car without permission and pocketed the money. You'll need to apply for student loans like most college students." "This is ridiculous," my father said, pushing back from the table so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. "Your brother deserves an education. Family supports family." "Funny how that support only flows in one direction," I replied, staying seated. "When I needed help with nursing prerequisites, I worked extra shifts. When I needed clinical uniforms, I picked up weekends. When my car needed repairs, I took the bus until I could afford it. Where was the family support then?" My mother's eyes filled with tears, her go-to move when things began to spiral out of her control. "Why are you doing this to us, to your brother? We're family." "Family doesn't steal from each other," I said. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't demand someone's savings like it's an obligation." My father's face darkened to a shade I'd seen only a few times in my life, each one seared into memory. "You have two options," he said, his voice low but pulsing with anger. "Either you write that check by Friday, or you find somewhere else to live. Family comes first, and if you can't prioritize family, you don't deserve to be part of this one." I leaned back slightly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Is that your final decision? And if you walk out that door without agreeing to help," he continued, ignoring my question, "you're dead to me. Dead to me. No daughter of mine would be so selfish." The threat that had worked on me for years, keeping me compliant, keeping me in line, slid right past me this time. Something inside had shifted. The fear wasn't there anymore, replaced by a clarity so sharp it almost felt like calm. "Then I guess you won't have a daughter by morning," I said. My mother gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Derek looked between us, confusion replacing his earlier smugness. My father's jaw tightened, as if he was grinding his teeth down to dust. I stood slowly, placing my napkin on the table. "I'll have my things out by tomorrow." The room went still. No one moved. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade, and in that heavy, frozen quiet, I knew I'd just crossed a line none of us could step back over. I waited for the house to swallow the last of the voices before I moved. The television in the living room went mute, then clicked off. Cabinet doors thudded shut. My mother's footsteps crossed the kitchen and back again. That familiar, fluttery pattern of someone cleaning what was already clean because they didn't know what else to do. A bathroom faucet ran. Pipes hummed. Eventually, the upstairs hallway groaned under my father's weight. The bedroom door shut, and the house did what it always did at night. It settled into its old bones and pretended to be gentle. I sat on the edge of my bed and let my pulse slow until the room came into focus. Then I stood, flicked on the desk lamp, and began to take my life apart. I didn't throw clothes into a bag the way people do in movies. There was no frantic grab, no messy pile. I folded with a quiet that felt ceremonial. 2 pairs of scrubs, jeans, a sweater soft from 100 washes, the thrift store black dress that made me look like I had my life more together than I did. I rolled socks into neat spirals, lined up underwear, like I was setting small soldiers at attention. It wasn't about tidiness. It was about telling myself I still had control over something, even if it was only the shape of a suitcase. When the clothes were done, I reached for the hard things first. Identification, birth certificate from the file folder labeled school in my desk drawer because there was no folder labeled me. Social security card tucked where it shouldn't have been, between a stack of old lab notes and a community college syllabus. Passport in a shoebox with winter scarves, because that had seemed like a good hiding place once upon a time. I set each item on the bed in a row and felt my throat tighten for reasons that didn't have anything to do with paper. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the folder I'd saved for reasons I couldn't justify to anyone but my future self. Car documents, insurance, maintenance receipts, the original title with my name alone in crisp black letters. I held that piece of cardstock in my hands and remembered the day it had arrived, how I'd propped it against a mug on my desk to admire in passing for a week, the way a kid might a trophy. Behind it, I found the registration card from April, the one with the neat, unfamiliar version of my name sitting beside my father's. The second line looked almost elegant. It made my stomach turn. I laid the 2 documents next to each other on the bed, original above, altered below, brackets of who I had been and who they needed me to be. Then I took my phone and began to photograph them, careful to capture edges and seals and the small raised stamp at the corner. I photographed the rent receipts he'd handwritten over the years, torn from a tiny pad and barely legible, but mine. 25 of them, then 30, then more, a jagged chronology of $400 months. I photographed bank statements with highlighted withdrawals labeled household, grocery lists I'd written in my mother's looping pen when she'd said she was too busy to go, Venmo entries to pay the utility bill when the lights had flickered and I'd been told, "We're a little short this month." Each picture felt like I was excavating a bone from dirt, brushing it clean, naming what it was. By 1 a.m, my desk had become a crime lab. Documents, dates, my own small handwritten notes in the margins where I'd tallied how much had disappeared without ever being called theft. I opened my laptop and created a folder on the desktop. Records, I typed, then renamed it. Madison Records. Then one more time, because something in me wanted it unmistakable. Madison Sanders, financial documentation. I imported every photo, labeled them with a rhythm that steadied my breathing. Rent 2019, Jan. Rent 2018, Phoebe. Title original. Title altered. Payment groceries 03155. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat as the files stacked into columns. I told myself I would sleep for an hour when the adrenaline wore off. It didn't. Instead, I opened a blank document and began to write in a voice I recognized from charting patient histories. Simple, factual, almost kind. To whom it may concern, I typed, and then deleted it. I wasn't asking permission, I tried again. This is a formal accounting of funds taken and property sold without my consent. The language felt too big and too small at the same time, but I kept going. I listed dates. I attached numbers that made my head buzz. Rent paid over 6 years. Grocery totals for months, when I'd been told, we'll pay you back Friday, and Friday never came. The sale of the car for an amount I had to guess at to be conservative. I cited the state website for title transfer requirements and tucked the link into a footnote because it felt like armor. Printing seemed like a luxury until I realized it wasn't. It was proof. I slipped into the hallway, listening for the soft rasp of my father's snore. It came steady through the wall, the same rhythm that had lulled me to sleep and haunted me in equal measure when I was little. I padded down the stairs, careful to skip the third step that squeaked, and into the small office off the kitchen where the family printer lived under a stack of old mail. It groaned when I woke it, then whirred to life, glowing an anemic blue. I fed it a handful of paper and sent the first document. The machine began its slow work, a page at a time, the sound indecently loud in the 2 a.m. Quiet. I held my breath on each pass, waiting for a voice to slice the air. None came. The pages slid into the tray, warm against my fingers. Back upstairs, I made 3 stacks on the bed, one to keep with me, one for an attorney I hadn't met yet, and one for the kitchen counter. I tucked the original title into my own pile, copied it twice for the others, and paper-clipped families of documents together like I was building little houses. I found a manila envelope at the back of my desk and wrote on its face with a black marker. Family Financial Accounting. The letters looked like someone else's, bolder, more sure. I stared at them until they belonged to me. Packing the rest felt easy after that. The stethoscope my clinical instructor had given me on graduation day. The picture of me and Amelia at a staff picnic, both of us sunburned and laughing. The small wooden box my grandmother left me with the earrings that had managed to escape my mother's jewelry drawer. I ran my fingers over the grain and remembered her voice as if she were in the doorway. Always know your worth, kiddo. I wrapped the box in a scarf and nestled it between my jeans. At some point in the quiet work of moving my life into a suitcase, I realized I wasn't crying. My throat ached like it wanted to, but the tears stayed where they were. Maybe they were tired of being currency. Maybe the body sometimes withholds what it knows will be wasted. I checked the clock. 2:47 a.m. The house had settled deeper, a kind of sleep that would take dynamite to disturb. I opened my banking app and changed my password, then my email, then every login I could think of while the names and numbers were still warm in my hands. Security questions. 2-factor. Recovery phone numbers. I took my father's email off an old bill pay account and stared for a moment at the tiny saved confirmation like it was a benediction. When everything that could live in a suitcase had been claimed, I zipped it shut in short, careful motions and lifted it off the bed. The weight pulled against my shoulder and then settled, familiar as a toddler who trusts you not to drop them. I paused with my hand on the doorknob and let the room take one last look at me. The bulletin board with photos pinned in a constellation only I understood. The bookshelf with dog-eared paperbacks I knew by sentences instead of titles. The blinds casting clean stripes of shadow on the floor. My room had never been overly precious to me, but the collection of it, the privacy of it, had been mine. Leaving it felt like stepping outside a skin I'd outgrown. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed, and the dishwasher blinked its finished cycle light into the empty room. I set the manila envelope on the counter where my mother put holiday place cards and Sunday casseroles. I didn't tuck it under anything. I didn't hide it the way I'd hidden pieces of myself for years. I placed it so you couldn't miss it when you came looking for your morning coffee. For a second, I imagined the choreography of what would happen after I was gone. The rattle of the handle, the pause, the way my father would say my name like a problem to be solved, the way my mother would put her hand to her throat and reach for a word like misunderstanding to throw over the mess like a thin blanket. The envelope sat there anyway, squared to the edge of the counter like a dare. I opened the back door and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cool and clean, and the sky had that bruised, almost morning tint that feels like a promise if you're the kind of person who believes in those. I pulled my phone out and typed a name into a search bar. Attorney Financial Exploitation, Family Law, our county. The first listings were slick ads with smiling faces that looked like they'd never missed a bill in their lives. I kept scrolling until I found something that felt less like a billboard and more like a person. Judith Bennett, the site said, experience in financial abuse cases, tenant rights, clear-eyed, practical advocacy. I clicked the contact form and wrote what I could without turning it into a confessional. I attached the folder link I'd created in a cloud drive and hit send before I could talk myself out of asking for help. 30 seconds later, an automatic reply landed in my inbox. We have received your message. Our office will contact you during business hours. It was as impersonal as a traffic sign and still managed to feel like someone had said, I see you. I texted Amelia next. Family blew up. I'm safe. Can I crash with you tonight? Her dots appeared so fast it made me laugh once, a small sound that surprised me. Of course, I'll leave the lobby door open. Guest room is yours. Want me to come get you? I looked out at the driveway, empty where the Corolla should have been, and texted back, I'll call a ride. Don't get out of bed. Thank you. The gratitude I felt for that girl, for the steady way she never tried to make my feelings neater than they were, was a heat that started in my ribs and moved outward. By the time I dragged my suitcase down the back steps, the neighborhood was as quiet as it ever got. A porch light across the street clicked on and off at some timer's command. Somewhere, a dog gave 2 soft barks and then seemed to think better of it. I rolled the suitcase along the path and stopped at the edge of the driveway, at the blank rectangle where my car had been. For a second, the absence felt louder than any argument I'd had at the table. I let myself slowly, the tires crunching over grit at the edge of the driveway. I watched the kitchen window as we turned the corner. The light over the sink cast a square of brightness onto the counter, illuminating the envelope like a stage mark. It looked ordinary from out here. A piece of paper and a paper sleeve, but I knew better. It was a fuse. And somewhere upstairs, a man who thought he held all the matches was sleeping with his back turned to the spark. The light in Amelia's guest room was different from the one in my own bedroom, softer somehow, filtered through gauzy curtains instead of the bent mini blinds that had hung in my parents' house since I was 12. It took me a moment to remember where I was. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the quiet hum of an unfamiliar refrigerator down the hall and the faint smell of coffee drifting through the air. Then my phone started vibrating against the nightstand. I'd silenced it before I left, but silence doesn't stop the alerts from piling up. The screen lit up with a wall of missed calls and messages. Dad, Mom, Derek, numbers I didn't recognize, group chats I'd never agreed to be in. 27 missed calls, 43 text messages, more notifications than I'd ever seen stacked in one place. I scrolled slowly at first, then faster. From Dad, "You're being ridiculous. Come downstairs and apologize." From Mum, "Please don't upset your father more. We can talk about this." From Derek, "Way to ruin my college plans, sis. Selfish much." I set the phone down on the bed and rubbed at my eyes. The words didn't sting the way they used to. Not yet, anyway. I knew they were just the opening volley. I'd seen it before, how the tone shifted from condescension to guilt to outright anger when I didn't fold. But I hadn't seen it with this much desperation. Another buzz. This one was from a number I recognized. Aunt Susan. She almost never texted. The preview bar stopped me mid-breath. "What did you leave behind? Your father is apoplectic. Did you really document everything? Years of it?" My thumb hovered over the screen. I could picture her perfectly. Standing in her narrow kitchen, phone in one hand, coffee cooling on the counter, a mix of curiosity and alarm in her voice as she read whatever mess they'd told her. I opened the message and typed back, "I'm safe. We can talk later." Seconds later, another came through. "They found the envelope this morning. Your father's shouting so loud the neighbors called me to ask what's going on. Your mom's been crying non-stop. I didn't respond." The images bloomed in my mind anyway. My father's voice bouncing off the kitchen walls, the envelope torn open, pages fanned out across the counter like a crime scene. My mother pacing between the sink and the stove, dabbing at her eyes with the same dish towel she used for everything, the two of them circling each other, deciding which version of events to feed to the outside world. By the time I made it to the kitchen, Amelia was sitting at the counter in leggings and a hoodie, sipping from a mug the size of a soup bowl. She glanced up, eyes scanning my face like she was checking a patient for symptoms. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" I pulled out the stool beside her. "Not really." "Coffee?" "Please." She poured without comment, sliding the mug towards me. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the heat settle into my fingers before I even took a sip. "They found it," I said finally. "The envelope?" I nodded. "Susan says the neighbors can hear him yelling. My mom's crying. Derek's calling me selfish. Same script as always, just louder." Amelia's lips pressed into a thin line. "And? And what? And how does it feel knowing you actually hit a nerve this time?" I thought about that for a moment, staring into the swirl of cream in my coffee. "Like, I'm not crazy," I said. "Like maybe the last 10 years actually happened the way I remember them, not the way they tell it." The phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Amelia didn't ask to see it, didn't push. She just reached over and squeezed my forearm once, before getting up to grab more coffee for herself. When I finally did glance at the screen, the name that filled it wasn't my parents'. It was Derek. "Is it true they sold your car without permission?" A pause, then another. "Dad says you're making it up, but Mom won't answer when I ask her directly. She just keeps saying you're being dramatic." For the first time in years, something in his tone didn't sound entirely sure of itself. I could almost hear the hesitation in his thumbs as he typed. Before I could decide whether to answer, another text came in, this one from Aunt Susan again. "Your father's on the porch arguing with the neighbors. He says you're spreading lies. I've never seen him this unglued. What exactly did you give them?" I set the phone face down on the counter. "It's starting," I said to Amelia. "What is?" "The cleanup. They'll start calling everyone, neighbors, relatives, friends from church. They'll tell them I've lost my mind or I'm ungrateful or both. They'll try to pull everyone back into their corner. Amelia leaned against the counter, arms crossed. So what are you going to do? I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I'm going to let them talk, and I'm going to make my own calls. But not today. She nodded once, like she approved of the pacing. Then she set her mug down and grabbed her keys. Come on, you can't just sit here staring at your phone all day. Where are we going? To the apartment complex my cousin manages. You said you wanted out, right? Let's find you somewhere to land. The words jolted me, equal parts terrifying and thrilling. I glanced at my phone one last time before sliding it into my bag. More messages were stacking up, unread, unopened, their tone predictable even without reading. But at the very top, a new notification blinked into existence, one that froze me in place. It was from my father. We need to talk before I make this legal. I didn't answer my father's message. The words, before I make this legal, sat there like a cheap bluff in a high-stakes game, and I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of an immediate reaction. I'd seen that tactic before. Scare me, force me into defensive mode, make me explain myself until I was apologizing for things I didn't do. Not this time. Instead, I slid my phone into my bag, grabbed my jacket, and followed Amelia out to her car. The crisp morning air still carried the edge of last night's rain, and the world outside seemed to be operating on its usual rhythm. Cars streaming down the road, people with coffee cups in one hand and phones in the other. I wondered how many of them had just walked out on their families, how many had been told their worth was measured in what they could give up. Amelia's car smelled faintly of lavender, air freshener, and takeout coffee. She started the engine, glancing at me sideways. You sure you're up for this? I nodded. If I don't find somewhere else to land, they'll think I'm bluffing. I'm not going back there, Amelia. She smiled faintly, eyes back on the road. Good. My cousin's place is decent. Not fancy, but safe. And he doesn't give a damn about perfect credit scores, so you won't have to deal with that nonsense. The apartment complex was on the other side of town, tucked between a small park and a row of mom-and-pop shops. Brick buildings with white trim, clean but unpretentious. As we pulled into the lot, I noticed a group of kids playing near the swings, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It struck me how different this felt from my parents' street. No careful facades, no silent rules about keeping up appearances. Amelia's cousin, Mark, was already waiting in the leasing office, a man in his late 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense way of speaking. You're Madison, right? Amelia told me you're looking for a place. We've got a one-bedroom open on the second floor. Want to see it? The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint, the walls a warm cream color instead of the cold beige I'd grown up with. A small balcony overlooked the park, and the sunlight poured in like it belonged there. I walked through slowly, my fingers trailing along the countertop, the edge of the windowsill. It was nothing extravagant, just 4 rooms and a closet, but it felt untouched by my parents' reach. That alone made it feel like luxury. Mark quoted the rent, the deposit. It was tight, especially now that my savings had taken a hit with the car gone, but it was doable. We can furnish it for an extra fee, he added, or you can bring your own. I didn't own much worth bringing, but the thought of sleeping on the floor after everything else I'd lost made me pause. Furnished, I said. My voice didn't waver. We signed the papers right there, the pen gliding over each line without the usual dread that came with contracts in my family's house. When it was done, Mark handed me a set of keys. You can move in immediately. Amelia grinned. Told you we'd find you somewhere. Back at her car, I let the keys sit in my palm for a moment, their cool weight a physical reminder that I'd just taken a step they couldn't undo. My phone buzzed again, and I ignored it until we were back on the road. It was Aunt Susan. Call me when you can. This is getting worse. Against my better judgment, I called her from the passenger seat. She answered on the first ring. Are you safe? Yes, I said. I'm fine, I've got a place lined up. She exhaled audibly. Good. Madison, your father is telling anyone who will listen that you're making false accusations. But, she hesitated, he can't keep his story straight about the car, and your mother let something slip about your grandmother's jewelry. Derek's been asking questions. Something in my chest shifted. What kind of questions? He wants to know if what you left in that envelope is true. I think he's starting to see things for what they are. I stared out the window at the passing streets, wondering what it would mean if Derek actually believed me. If the golden child started to realize the gold had been mined from someone else's back. Has Dad done anything else? Susan's voice dropped. He tried to report the car as stolen this morning. The officer asked for the title, and when your father showed it, they saw the forgery. There might be charges. Amelia glanced at me sharply when she heard that, but I kept my tone even. That's not why I did this. I know. But actions have consequences. And Madison, your grandmother would be proud of you. She worried about how much control he had over you. She told me once she hoped you'd learn to walk away. I swallowed hard, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. I think I finally have. We hung up, and I stared down at the phone in my lap. The missed calls counter had jumped again, and new texts were starting to crowd the screen. Some were predictable. Come home and we'll work this out. Others were less so. We can discuss terms if you're reasonable. It was that last one from my father that made me stop scrolling. Terms. He wasn't talking about reconciliation. He was talking about a deal. And if my father was ready to make a deal, it meant he was more worried than he was angry. I set the phone down, my mind already moving 3 steps ahead, and realized this was the first time in years I felt like I had the advantage. Then, as if to prove the point, another message came in, short, almost cautious. It was from Derek. If they lied about the car, what else did they lie about? Derek's text sat there like a loose thread I wasn't sure I wanted to pull. If they lied about the car, what else did they lie about? It was the first thing he'd said in years that didn't feel rehearsed, the first words not wrapped in the smug assurance that our parents' version of events was the truth. I stared at it, thinking about all the ways I could answer, and all the ways it could go wrong. Amelia glanced over from the driver's seat, noticing my silence. You gonna respond? I don't know yet, I said. If he's really questioning them, I don't want to scare him back into line. She didn't push, just turned her focus back to the road. The weight of my phone in my hand felt heavier than it should have, as if the conversation it held had the potential to shift something permanent in my family. By the time we got back to her apartment, my phone was buzzing again, this time with a call from Aunt Susan. I answered. Madison, she said quickly, her voice low, like she didn't want someone in the background to overhear. I've been talking to Derek. He's asking me questions about things that happened when you were younger. About the scholarship money, the jewelry, the rent you paid. He's confused. I think he believed they helped you through nursing school. They didn't, I said flatly. I know that, she replied, but I don't think he did. I told him to talk to you directly. He wants to. Just be patient with him. If he's willing to see it, it'll take time. I agreed, though part of me wondered if Derek was looking for the truth or for reassurance that his own place in the family wasn't built on lies. Not long after we hung up, a new message from Derek appeared. Can we talk? Just us, no yelling, no dad, no mom. I typed back, not in person, not yet. Text for now. The typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. Okay. Did Dad really take your graduation money for the deck repairs? Yes. And the student loan refund? Yes. And the scholarship? And the pearls Grandma left me? There was a long pause. Then, they told me you gave them willingly, that you were happy to help. That's what they've always said when they took money for my stuff, that you were glad to do it. I could feel something inside me harden, even as I softened my tone. Derek, being told you're happy to do something you were never asked about isn't the same as being willing. Another pause. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Before I could respond, Amelia's phone rang. She stepped into the kitchen to take it, and I caught pieces of the conversation. Her cousin Mark, confirming my move-in date, the furniture delivery schedule. The normalcy of it was almost jarring against the backdrop of my family unraveling in real time. When she came back, I told her about Derek. He's cracking, I said. I don't know how far it'll go, but something's changing. Amelia leaned on the back of the couch. If he starts questioning them, you won't be the only problem they have to manage. That's leverage. The word felt strange in my mouth when I repeated it. Leverage. I'd never had any in that house, not really. My parents held the money, the rules, the narrative. But now, with Derek asking questions, and Aunt Susan on my side, the ground was shifting. The rest of the day passed in a blur of small victories. A text from Mark, confirming the keys were ready whenever I wanted them. A call back from Judith Bennett's office, offering me a consultation the next morning. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt like I was playing offense instead of defense. But the messages from my parents kept coming. My father alternated between threats and bargaining. Return the documents, and we can forget this happened. You'll regret this when you need us. We can settle this without lawyers if you cooperate. My mother's texts were all emotion, no substance. You've broken your father's heart. We raised you better than this. I can't believe you'd humiliate us like this. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat on the couch with Amelia, laptop open, combing through my bank records again to make sure I hadn't missed anything for Judith. Every line item felt like another stitch in the net I was building, one they wouldn't see until it was too late. By evening, I was exhausted. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, showered, and changed into an old hoodie of Amelia's. I just sat down with a cup of tea when my phone buzzed again, bypassing the DND setting. It was Derek. You should know, Dad's looking for a lawyer too. He's furious no one will take his case. I blinked. Why not? Susan says it's because of the forged title. No one wants to touch it. But he's not letting it go. He's talking about going after you another way. My tea cooled untouched as I stared at the screen, the words another way repeating in my head like a warning bell. I was about to type a reply when another message came through. This one from an unknown number. No preview text, just the prompt to open it. Against my better judgment, I tapped it. And there, staring back at me, was a photo of the outside of Amelia's apartment building. The photo on my phone screen was grainy but unmistakable. The brick facade, the white trim, the small row of hedges near the entrance, Amelia's apartment building. It was taken from across the street, just far enough to look casual but close enough that whoever sent it had been here. My stomach tightened into a knot. I stared at it for several seconds, fighting the urge to call my father immediately. That was the game. Rattle me, make me react, pull me back into the rhythm where they set the beat and I danced to it. I slid the phone across the coffee table toward Amelia without a word. She looked at it, her jaw tightening. Do you think? Yes, I said before she finished. Or someone they know. Her expression shifted from concern to something sharper. They don't get to do this. We document it, we move forward, and we don't let them know it got to you. I nodded, my pulse steadying. I'm meeting with Judith tomorrow. If they're going to play like this, I want every move on record. That night, I barely slept, my mind replaying the past few days in loops, walking out of the house, the envelope on the counter, Susan's warnings, Derek's questions. Every moment felt like a step on a path I hadn't planned but couldn't turn away from. And underneath it all was a quiet, unshakable certainty. I wasn't going back. Judith's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaky floors and the faint smell of paper that had been sitting in drawers for decades. She was exactly what I needed her to be, direct, unflinching, and already familiar with the type of financial abuse I'd laid out in my envelope. I laid the documents out on her desk, one neat stack after another. She leafed through them without interruption, her eyes sharp behind thin-framed glasses. When she finally looked up, there was no hesitation in her voice. "You have a strong case. The forged title alone is enough to put them in a very vulnerable position. Add the rent receipts, the bank statements, and your written account. It paints a very clear pattern." "What's the next step?" I asked. "A formal demand letter," she said. "Return of the car sale proceeds, plus additional restitution for the documented financial exploitation. We give them a deadline. If they refuse, we proceed to civil action. Most people settle when they see evidence this thorough." Her confidence was a balm I didn't know I'd been waiting for. We spent the next hour organizing the timeline, numbering the exhibits, drafting the language that would arrive in my parents' mailbox like a cold splash of reality. When I left her office, the city felt different. The streets were the same. The wind still cut down the blocks, but I walked like I had armor now. I went straight to Mark's complex, signed the last of the paperwork, and took the keys to my new apartment. The place was bare except for the furniture I'd agreed to rent, but even in its emptiness, it felt like something living. I opened the balcony door and stepped out into the sunlight, breathing in air that didn't belong to anyone else. No rules, no unspoken debts, no one deciding which parts of my life I was allowed to keep. By the end of the week, Judith had sent the letter. My parents didn't respond right away, but the silence itself felt like movement. I didn't hear from Derek for a few days either, until one evening his name lit up my phone. "They're furious," he wrote. "Dad says you're trying to destroy the family, but he's also not denying the stuff in your documents anymore. Just be careful." 2 days later, Judith called. "They're willing to settle," she said. "Full value of the car, plus a negotiated sum for the other items. Total would be $38,000. I almost dropped the phone. It wasn't everything they owed me, but it was enough. Enough to start over without looking back. Enough to cover the gap the car left in my life. Enough to make the years of records and quiet resentment worth something tangible." We signed the agreement through her office. No apologies were offered, none requested. The check arrived by certified mail, plain white envelope, return address typed in neat block letters. I deposited it the same day, watching the numbers in my account jump to a place they'd never been before. The next morning, I bought a used car. Different model, different color, nothing that would remind me of the one they took. I ran my hands over the steering wheel before I started it, letting the reality sink in. This one was mine, in every way that mattered. That night, I sat in my new apartment, the balcony door open to let in the warm air, the sound of the park drifting in. My phone buzzed on the table. It was Derek again. "I've been reading your documents. I didn't know half of it. I'm sorry. Really sorry." I typed back, "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but they carried years of weight. The apartment felt more like home with every breath. Plants on the balcony, a few framed photos on the wall, groceries in the fridge that I'd bought for myself without anyone's commentary. The air didn't carry the heaviness of waiting for the next demand. I was stacking the last of my books on a shelf when my phone lit up again. This time it wasn't Derek. It was my mother. Just one line. "We need to see you. There's something you should know about your grandmother's will." I stared at my mother's text until the letters blurred. "There's something you should know about your grandmother's will." After everything, the screaming, the threats, the settlement, now she wanted to dangle a piece of family history in front of me like a baited hook. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity has a way of slipping under locked doors. I typed back, "You can tell me here." The reply came faster than I expected, not over text, in person. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and walked to the balcony, leaning against the railing while the late afternoon sun warmed my arms. The park below was full of kids chasing each other between the swings and the slide, their laughter spilling upward in bursts. It was a normal day in a life I'd fought to carve out. Going back into their world, even for one conversation, felt like walking into a fire I'd just escaped. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I called Aunt Susan. She picked up on the second ring. "She texted you too, didn't she?" Susan said without preamble. "Yes," I admitted. "Do you know what this is about?" "I have a guess. Your grandmother left you some items, personal items, valuable ones, specifically in her will. Things that never should have gone to anyone else, but they disappeared. I think your mother's trying to get ahead of you finding out officially." The words hit with a dull thud, confirming what I'd suspected for years. "Why now?" "Because they've lost control of the story," Susan said. "They know the rest of the family is starting to see the truth, and they're desperate to offer something to make you come back to the table. Be careful, Maddie. They're not doing this for you, they're doing it for them." I thanked her and hung up, my mind turning over the possibilities. Jewelry, antiques, maybe even money, but no matter what it was, it came with strings, and I'd spent the past month cutting every single one. That night, Derek texted again. "Mom's serious about the will. She says she has something that belongs to you. I think it's the necklace Grandma gave you." I sat on my bed, the memory of that necklace as vivid as the day I first wore it. Cool pearls against my skin, my grandmother's hand steady as she fastened the clasp, her voice low and certain. "Always know your worth." Seeing it again would mean something, but taking it from my mother's hands, that was a different matter. I agreed to meet them, but on my terms, neutral ground, public place, no house, no closed doors. A small cafe near the edge of town, the kind where the staff know you just well enough to notice if something's off. When I arrived, my mother was already there, a small pond sitting on the table between her and my father. Derek sat off to the side, his expression somewhere between wary and hopeful. My father didn't waste time. "We thought it was time you had this," he said, sliding the box toward me. His tone was calm, but his eyes were measuring every twitch of my face. I opened it. The pearls lay coiled inside, exactly as I remembered them, the clasp gleaming in the cafe's warm light. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "They were always yours," my mother said softly, as if history could be rewritten by tone alone. "No," I said, closing the box. "They were mine until you decided they weren't. Now they're just coming back to where they should have been all along." My father shifted, clearly impatient. "We can't change the past, Madison, but maybe this can be the start of fixing things." I looked at Derek. His eyes flicked between us, and for the first time, I saw him not as the golden child, but as someone standing at the edge of the same cliff I'd been pushed from years ago. He gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible. "I appreciate getting them back," I said, standing. "But fixing things doesn't start with a box. It starts with the truth. And until you're ready for that, there's nothing else to talk about." I left the cafe with the necklace in my bag, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. Outside, the air was cool and clean, the kind that fills your lungs and makes you feel lighter. Back at my apartment, I placed the necklace on the shelf above my desk, next to the small wooden box from my grandmother, and a photo of me and Amelia at the hospital picnic. These were the things I carried forward, not because of their value, but because they were mine without condition. As evening settled, I sat on the balcony with a mug of tea, the lights from the park flickering on one by one. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was Derek. "I think I'm ready to tell you what Dad's planning next. If this story struck a chord with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who kept crossing your boundaries? Your voice matters here, and if you don't want to miss the next powerful story, hit that subscribe button and join me for more real-life dramas you won't forget."